Welcome. My name is Garth A. Fowler, and I'm the Associate Executive Director of APA's Office of Graduate and Postgraduate Education and Training. I'll be your moderator for today's latest installment of our PsycIQ series. I'm excited to be joined today by my colleague, Amber Story, who is the APA's Associate Executive Director for Scientific Affairs. And today, Amber and I will be talking about emerging careers for psychology researchers, and more importantly, talking about how do you position yourself for what's coming down the line in terms of the job market, both things we know about and stuff that's probably outside the horizon for us to predict. So I think about this when I was in graduate school, my classmates and I had our sights set on a career in research, and typically that meant being a faculty member somewhere conducting research and teaching. And I would think for many years this was the typical career track for most anyone who got an advanced degree, at least a doctoral degree in psychology and had an interest in a research career. But today we know much has changed. There's lots of data out there showing that universities and colleges don't hire as many tenure-track faculty members as they used to. And at the same time that there's been a shift in hiring individuals with doctoral training at the university level, but they're doing more administrative or strategic position work instead of faculty members. We also see that there are businesses and nonprofits, that the business and nonprofit worlds are evolving really quickly. And they have more opportunities and options for individuals like us than ever before. So if you're looking to tap into those new careers outside the traditional academic setting, then a new set of questions arise for us. And really, what kinds of organizations need someone with our types of skill sets? How do we identify those opportunities? And how do we distinguish ourselves from those other applicants applying? So we're hoping that today's conversation will shine light on some of these questions and help you kind of set your way on finding your own career path. To kick off the discussion, I'm going to hand this over to Amber, who's going to share some helpful insights and tips on sectors you might consider exploring and ways to kind of actually position yourself. So Amber, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you, Garth, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here. So, like most researchers, you were probably sort of raised in an academic environment. Your mentor was an academic, your colleagues probably had goals to stay in the academic environment, but there's any number of reasons why you might be interested in exploring other opportunities. Maybe you're dissatisfied with your current position, maybe you're trying to juggle family demands or solve a two-body problem, or maybe you're just itching to do something different. So today I'm going to talk to you about some factors you can take into consideration as you think about these other professional opportunities, and then I'll try to offer you some practical advice on how to move ahead. So before you begin your search, it is important to know why you are thinking about another career. People often think about career choices as academic versus not academic, and it's kind of a simplistic way of thinking about it. Even within academia, one can have any number of different kinds of diverse careers. As you well know, some positions focus more on teaching, some focus more on research, some are more administrative in its type. All of those can be very potentially rewarding careers as long as they're a good fit for you and your values and your skills. If not, maybe you want to stay in academia, but change departments or change institutions and find one that's a better fit for you. Over the years, you have honed many important skills: critical thought, statistical know-how, communications, public speaking. You're a competitive candidate for many career trajectories, but you have to think about, well, which one? Perhaps you're really committed to psychological science, but you're not so interested in doing the science yourself. Well, there's any number of ways you can support science. You could work at a federal funding agency like the National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health or even the National Institutes of Justice. They're looking for people with scientific expertise like you to help them identify promising research. Similarly, you could work at a private foundation that funds research like Kavli or Templeton or Robert Wood Johnson. You might also consider supporting science through advocacy and public education, in which case you might be interested in positions in nonprofit organizations and professional societies like APA. Or, maybe you really do like conducting research. You're really interested in continuing to do that, but the research ideas don't really have to be your own. Right? Well, you could look for positions in research and assessment companies or in nonprofits that provide research services to others. Booz Allen comes to mind, ABT, RAND. There's a lot of companies out there that provide those kinds of services that need your expertise. Or you might find opportunities in larger corporations that have research and development arms. They are looking for people who know how to gather data, analyze data that'll inform their strategic planning, their marketing, and even their product development. So there's really any number of ways that your skills and your knowledge and your expertise in human behavior and cognition, and even non-human behavior and cognition, to a completely new enterprise. You might find some inspiration and guidance from the APA Science Directorate series on what we call interesting careers in psychological science. The website, which is going to be listed at the end slide of this program, it contains essays of dozens and dozens of people who have PhDs in psychological science who have pursued a wide variety of careers. There's a person on there who's an aviation policy specialist, a science writer, a video game user researcher, and an international market research consultant. Again, as a psychological scientist, you've had a lot of training in the scientific method and statistics and analytics, but not everyone has the same strengths. It's important to know what your strengths are when you're trying to find a position, to know what's a good match. A first step could be a self-assessment. This might be as easy as talking to a trusted colleague or a mentor to try to identify what your strengths are and any areas that might need improvement. You could hire a consulting career coach. That might be a helpful maneuver for you. You could also use some self-assessment tools. The APA has a tool for individual development plans. Now, granted, this is for usually for people who are like graduate students, but the fundamentals are the same, and they're very helpful. I should also mention that the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, has a IDP program as well that's very helpful. These programs will help you identify what your skills are, what your strengths are, what your values are, and what your goals are, and it will help you in your career path. To find and position yourself for new opportunities, I really can't overestimate the importance of networking. It really is important to know a lot of people and get to know what's going on out there. There are many opportunities that aren't advertised or they're in the development phase, and networking is a great way to find out what's going on before it even happens. And don't limit yourself to networking in professional settings. Even casual settings can provide networking opportunities. The other day I was waiting for my commuter train and struck up a conversation with a woman who turned out to be a professional staffer on the Hill, and we have some interest in common, so we exchanged cards. What may come of it? I don't know, but it's an opportunity, and it's good to avail yourself to that. When you are looking for other opportunities, let those in your network know that you are open to considering alternative pathways. That can help them keep their ears open for you. You might even consider a sort of test trial for a career. Some of the positions at the National Science Foundation for program directors, division directors, even the head of directorates are temporary in nature. They're what we call rotators. These are academics who take a year or two or even 3 away from their university lives, and they come to NSF and they direct a program or direct a division or direct a directorate. They help fund the research that is important to NSF's portfolio. At the end of their time at NSF, some go home with brand new knowledge, energized. Some use their experience at NSF to pivot to new positions within their university or even new universities. And some like it so much at NSF they decide to stay. Other opportunities are fellowships. So AAAS has a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program that's very popular. It offers a 1 or 2 year opportunity to learn about policymaking and to apply your knowledge and skills to federal decision making, to policy development and implementation, which can be quite rewarding. APA partners with AAAS with this opportunity and hosts its own executive and congressional fellowship program. I hope you found this helpful. I do have a couple parting thoughts. One is, you are responsible for your career trajectory. No one's going to look out for it but you. You can certainly rely on other people, get advice from other people, talk to them about their experiences, but ultimately it's up to you. And the second is, it's often easy to get paralyzed by this important decision of what is my next career going to look like. And it is an important decision, but trust me, it is not the final decision. You will have many other decisions in your career, some big, some small. So this is not the last decision you're going to make, it's simply the next one. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, Amber. I really appreciate that. And as you were talking, we got a number of questions that came in, and we had a number of people who submitted questions. So a number of questions that have come in previously. So as I'm going to work through those, I think I'm going to start by giving you, an easy one as I go through and look. And one of those that I think that people would like to hear is to have you talk a little bit about your own career trajectory, and maybe some of those opportunities and how it changed over time. People like personal stories. I think it helps give them kind of a model to follow. But I think at the same time, it's like you said, that this is your story and it helps them draw parallels to what their story would be.
Sure, yes. Well, I started off on an academic career trajectory like many people do. I was a professor, tenured, but I had other goals in my heart, which was to be in the same city as my then fiance, now husband. And that, that kind of why you want to change, that determines the type of job search you're going to be doing. Mine was obviously going to be limited to a geographic area. And so just about anything that looked appropriate, I put in my hat for. I was very thrilled when the National Science Foundation called for an interview. Even within my time at the National Science Foundation, I had a couple of different positions there. Once I was a program director for social psychology, and then I became the deputy division director for behavioral and cognitive sciences there. Both were very interesting and challenging jobs, and I really enjoyed my time at NSF. But I was itching to do something different. I was eager to have some new challenges. But because I liked my job, I had the luxury of being really picky. I didn't have to send out my application everywhere. I only sent it to places that were really intriguing to me. And frankly, I didn't get everything I wanted. But this particular job at APA came down the pike, and I said, oh, that's it. So I was very excited about that. I can tell you that networking played a huge role in my latter job search of trying to be very particular and find the right job for me.
Excellent. So one of the questions that, one of the questions that I was thinking about is what's the most common concern you hear when academic researchers are really starting to make this career move? Maybe they're in their place and they're trying to figure out, nonprofit versus government versus should I stay in academia? So what is kind of the most common concern that you would hear from individuals when they're looking to start this whole process?
Well, I think, Garth, you actually kind of hit upon it. What I hear is I don't know where to start. How do I hone this down? What's out there even? I think that there are more sort of websites and that kind of technology that's available to you. Social media sites like LinkedIn you can enter your own profile and it will send you jobs that match your profile. Glassdoor is another example of that. Or if you're interested in federal jobs, USA Jobs has listings of government jobs. But it is really a lot easier to look if you narrow down your search. And that's why I think it's important to know your strengths, to have a good self-assessment, and have an idea of the kind of jobs that match those strengths.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And also when you were saying about places to look, it made me think of this, of the idea that once you start engaging outside your typical career, let's say network, you start to find lots of opportunities. And one that comes to mind is when I started here at AAAS, or excuse me, at APA. I used to be at AAAS, but when I started at APA, I got involved in a group called the Graduate Career Consortium, and it's a group I work very closely with my mission here at APA. And they send out job advertisements through their listserv quite often, and it's not ones that I often find on your typical like Chronicle of Higher Ed or Inside Higher Ed, or even you would find in say like Science or here at APA. And so I think part of it is once you start breaking into these groups through your networks and through trying something out, you find other resources for that kind of niche area that you're looking for. So
I agree.
Let's see, what are some of the other questions that have been coming in here? How about what advice would you give to a young researcher who's looking to make a career change that's compared to, say, someone who's more mid-career? We're getting questions about individuals saying, but I might we have some people who are graduate students. We even have an undergraduate who's in here listening. So they're kind of thinking about what stage they're in. What advice would you give to someone who's, mid-career, more established than, say, their early career? Is there any differences?
Well, I imagine there are, and a lot of it would probably be dependent upon, your expectations as a early or mid-career. For an early career person, perhaps your expectations are for more entry-level positions and a reasonable salary. Mid-career, you probably would want something that was a little bit more advanced. I'm not sure that the advice in terms of sort of practical things to do is any different. But I would say one of the things that I've learned over the years that I don't think I appreciated early on was sometimes the only way to move up is to move out. That is, you might be looking at a job that looks parallel to the job you currently have, and you're like, why would I consider moving? Well, it may be that other job, the lateral to where you are now, has a lot more opportunities. It's like being at the top of one ladder and moving to another ladder where you're at the bottom and you have nowhere else to go but up.
Yeah, I think I like that analogy, and I think that's a really good one, because sometimes we get stuck in knowing the world that we are in and not knowing that parallel move might actually look more like an entry-level position on that world, but maybe it is higher up, or maybe it does open up bigger doors and bigger pathways. And so I think that's also something that people can start to investigate and talk about when they use their network. Sorry, I'm a little fumbling just a little bit today. So that was one of the questions that I've seen coming in, is kind of talking more about using the network and kind of understanding what is it that you could expect from your network. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about those types of things, like when you're like, I liked your example about on the card, you're on the train and you traded cards. I wouldn't necessarily consider that person quote unquote part of in your network, but you really did make a network connection. So maybe just a little bit more about that. It's for our audience to hear.
Well, I just think that it's important to not only to have a network, but I think to use your network in a way that will be beneficial to you. I had several job opportunities come to me through friends and acquaintances. I would never have known about them otherwise. Or I had friends and acquaintances who suggested my name to someone who then turned around and recruited me. It's important that you have these confidants that you can say, hey, I'm open. And you could even give them your CV or your resume. And you can't know everyone, but you're more likely to know someone who knows someone if you have a good, solid sort of professional network.
Well, and I also liked your story that you probably developed this conversation with this person on the train because you both said something and you went, oh, I'm interested in that, or one of you said something and the other one said, oh, I'm interested in that too, but I work on it from this perspective, and she had said, oh, well, that's interesting to me, I work on it from others' perspective. So sometimes networking is really just as simple as sharing what you're interested in and open to hearing what someone else's perspective and opportunities, what opportunities they see in that area.
Absolutely. I think Well, it's not new advice that the best conversationalist is a good listener and someone who asks questions and shows interest in others.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really good. So we have a question on here that asks about, it's a very specific question. It says, what kind of opportunities are there for someone who's a quantitative research psychologist? But I think that question is really interesting because I think it really stems into a unique aspect of what we all share an identity as trained by psychology, is that there are fields of quantitative research, but then we're also quantitative scientists by nature. So I was wondering if we could talk a little bit more about that type of relationship, or that type of.
Yeah, I think the quantitative skills are a very important part of a skill set that most scientists have. And if you're interested in an industry career, that's a great skill set to have. You know, a lot of work that goes on, quote unquote, in the real world isn't, it doesn't have the control that you would have in a laboratory experimental setting. And so it takes someone with real skill to be able to construct a rigorous and valid test of a certain hypothesis with all this messiness that the real world gives you. And then also to be able to make sense of that data. And I think someone with strong quant skills has that.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And I think, someone mentioned before that we talk a lot about nonprofits and about government, but I think there's a fair number of opportunities in for-profit and for private companies. And one of the things that I think of right now are all these organizations and companies that are running, online open courses and things like that. They have huge data sets, and they're looking for people that have the ability to efficiently move through large data mining and go through large data sets and help them come up with approaches to make sure that they get meaningful information. So I think today that there's interest in evidence-based decision making and the ability for there to be large, especially for online companies like Facebook or what's that up? Google. Why was I blanking on that one? Google and all the data that they get. I see many opportunities where they're looking for people who can really help them move through all that data. And I think go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know a lot of psychologists who work at Facebook and Google and a lot of other of those, like Match.com, for example.
Right, exactly. I think that's another great example. So I think it's also trying to figure out and work with those groups and trying to figure out where those go. Where do you think are some of the best resources, though, that individuals can start looking for information about the types of jobs or trends of jobs or these big areas in nonprofit, for-profit, federal?
Right. Well, I've already mentioned the collection of essays that the Science Directorate has on interesting careers, and I point that out just because sometimes you don't realize what's out there, and it's a nice sample of a wide array of different options and how they went about searching for those options. I think that's a very important part. You get a nice sample of different processes to follow. But in terms of resources, obviously APA has Psych Careers that is a broad-based sort of job board. A lot of APA divisions, you might be a member of a division. Some have very excellent resources for their division membership and job boards. For government, usajobs.com, you can go in and look for different types of jobs, really tailor it to what you're looking for, and get some ideas there.
Yeah, I think those are good. And other ones that come to mind also are, again, I'm thinking of how individuals interact in their current research positions or in their current jobs and what kind of opportunities and network they have. And it goes back to that example I think I mentioned before, that my work through that Graduate Career Consortium and my work in graduate education has opened up those types of resources. And like I said, there's often jobs that come through on that job board. I also think if you're a current APA member, there's the different divisions. Many of the different divisions have resources on what to do with your degree and what kind of job opportunities are out there. So I think there are, again, lots of different areas that they can look for these resources in addition to what you mentioned from those. But I think taking advantage to look at where are you already engaged and what kind of information do, say, your divisions or your professional associations or even your volunteer associations? Do they often have information and resources out there to help them? Here's a question that I think is good. What are some of the most important or the best widely applicable skills to build when you're looking to move outside your current research position and maybe want to take your research skills to a company, or you just want to break out from that and do something completely different?
Right. Gosh, the first thing that pops to mind is communication. No matter what you do in your career, communication skills, effective communication skills are critical, and that's both oral and written. You're going to be called upon to communicate interpersonally and perhaps then more formally. A lot of us, who have educations in psychological sciences, feel that we have pretty good communication skills. But then it also depends on the type of writing you do. Some of us are very used to scientific writing, which isn't quite the same as, say, science writing for the public. So you need a broad-based, effective way of communicating. I think that's critical.
I think another one, I speak to hiring managers and work a lot in my job with individuals who work for private companies and nonprofits. And I think another skill that they say that they'd like to see, quote unquote, scientists refine before they come to work for them is their team working skills. And I think it's a really good nuance, like you were saying before, that our teamwork in science, there are teamwork examples. Like I tell people all the time, if you've ever co-written a paper, if you've ever shared a piece of large equipment like a microscope or anything like that, or the type of, or a subject pool for your research, you kind of already have a hand on team working, right? But I think there's also a nuance of how teams work in a business setting. But being able to either establish some teamwork skills or be able to describe and kind of, provide context for your current teamwork skills, I think are really good when someone's looking for, looking to make a change, or that's a skill that people really need beyond their already research skills and things like that. Yep, I see that we have our resources slides up that we've already talked about. And I think maybe one last question before we close up here. One that I've seen a couple of times that has come through is, and I think maybe the best way to look at it is I've had some people write and say, do you really need to do a postdoc? And do I really need to be in academia before I switch to going to a job outside academia? And what do you think is the answer to that question?
That's a good question. I think you have to think about that as a balance between, opportunities gained by, doing a postdoc or starting a career in academia, and opportunities lost. I mean, obviously, if in a postdoc or an early career, you'll gain new experiences, you'll gain skills, you'll gain, for example, in a postdoc, a different mentor, so you'll have experiencing a different mentoring relationship than you've had in the past, different culture within a different group. But the opportunities lost is time in terms of entering your other career or your new career. If you're interested in going into, say, industry, the PhD carries a lot of weight in industry. Adding that postdoc might not add that much more weight.
Much more, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of summarizing what you said before, which is, building your own story and understanding you have a set of resources out there. There are opportunities if you start looking at all these different areas that we hadn't considered before, but it is kind of building your own story to figure out what's going to work for you and establishing the career path that's most rewarding. So
absolutely. I mean, the only exception to that was if you knew what kind of job you wanted, say big data, a postdoc dealing with big data analytics could go real far.
It's
a balance, yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amber, and I want to thank all our listeners who have participated. This concludes our webinar. We hope that everyone found it helpful. If you signed up and registered, you're going to receive a recording of the webinar over the next couple of days. It does take some time for us to pull this down and coordinate and everything, but it will come and it will have the embedded resources and slides that we're talking about. I also would like the attendees to stay online if possible. When it shuts down, we have a short survey that helps us gather feedback and helps us refine the system. So we do really want to get your thoughts and suggestions for webinars, not just what didn't work, but what did work and where you think you can go with this. And this is part of our PsychIQ series, so we're in the process of developing blogs and articles about emerging careers and how you can best position yourself. So please take a opportunity to check out some of the APA's resources. There's the PsychIQ. Amber, you've mentioned a lot about what's coming out of the Science Directorate. And of course, I'd be remiss if I did not mention that even in my own directorate in education, we have a blog. We have resources to help graduate students and early career psychologists set themselves on their most rewarding career path. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.